So let's dive in and talk about each of these three aspects or techniques for behavioral control. The first is culture, and it's the most satisfying, let's face it. So the idea is, particularly in professional organizations, we create a set of norms that say this is how we do this. Even though this firm is under great attack today, and has been for about the past 5 or 6 years, Goldman Sachs was known as having this incredible culture that produced great leadership. And one of the aspects of Goldman Sachs culture was giving back. For many, many years, there's been a revolving door. People have left Goldman Sachs and gone into government, would do a time in government to serve the country, and then would rotate back to Goldman Sachs. Another example of a company that has really focused on culture in an unusual industry is Zappos, the shoe people. They, the CEO, Tony Hsieh, has just turned this into his happiness experiment, which is what he calls it. And they put a tremendous focus on the culture of that organization, which is a little bit unique because that company, to a large measure, is a call center. And that's not a place where you typically have a lot of a big emphasis on culture. But the one that is commonly talked about, and the one that I'm familiar with because I have so many friends that work for them, is Southwest Airlines. And so there's that Southwest culture. Things like I have friends that are pilots for them, and if they're late getting the bags out to the airplane, and the pilot has time, he really will go down to the ramp and help them pitch the bags up into the belly of the plane. That's just a part of the culture. And so we all want to feel like we work in organizations like this, but it's not always practical, which is why, in many cases, organizations have extensive rule books. Often, the bigger they get, the more they tend to write rules. So we've all seen human resources rules and rules for official travel and those sorts of things. That is a way to try to put some discipline into a system. Where you tend to see these is when the workers tend to be of shorter term as opposed to longer term. If they're doing a repetitive task where standardization is desired, if you call a call center, for example, you don't want to get different answers to the same question every time you call. You'd like to feel like there's some standardization that leads to the same answer to my problem, and that comes through a set of rules. But every organization does have rules. Southwest Airlines, they tell the pilots how soon they have to be there in advance for the flights. They have a specific rule because many of the pilots commute to their work location. So they have a rule that says you had to have so many opportunities to make a commute to your destination, so that if you don't show up one day because you missed your flights or the weather was bad or something like that, they have a rule as to whether that's your fault or whether the company just accepts it as the cost of doing business. And then there's the idea of rewards. Now, rewards can be used to supplement either type of behavior, both cultural and rule-based, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. But rewards are also a part of it. And so let me give you an example of a reward at Southwest Airlines. When I had one friend who had just started working for them, the way you fit on the pilot food chain is you do something called you sit reserve, which means you don't have a set schedule. You have so many days a month that you are just available for Southwest to call when a pilot gets sick and they have to throw somebody into the system to make sure flights aren't canceled. And the very first one, a friend that went to work for them, he got reserve. His hot days were both over Thanksgiving and over Christmas. And I said, wow, those are days you're going to fly because you're sitting there on the two holidays. He said, actually not. He said, this will be the last Christmas and Thanksgiving I get to spend with my family for many years, because the culture is that you don't call in sick and stick it to the other guy while he has to step up and take your flight. I thought that's pretty cool. And then he also said, in all those particular holidays, they get more for flying. So they have a positive reason, cultural, you don't stiff your buddy, but they also have a negative reason, I want to say negative, it's not punishment, it's if I don't call in sick and actually fly the trip, I make more money. And so, what does make for an effective reward system? You can see it on the slide. It needs to be flexible and adaptable, but yet it also needs to be clear, because the point of that is you don't want your reward system to be perceived as arbitrary. Because as soon as it's perceived as arbitrary, suddenly, oh, it's the good boys and girls get rewards, and the rest of us, we don't. When do performance rewards work best? And this would be pay bonuses and the like. Well, when you incentivize performance, the more that those performance tasks are are independent, the better it tends to be. Because that way a person feels like if I work hard on this, I can in fact achieve the goal and can get the performance reward. The more it the more it relies on other people, the less certain I am that my extra effort is going to allow me to get the reward, and it tends to be less effective. In a for example, let's take an unrelated diversification company. If they were to have a performance reward that was based on company profitability, that's not necessarily very motivational to everybody that's down in the divisions, because they feel like, hey, I did great, but these guys over here messed it up, and these gals did in the middle, and so net effect is I don't get any performance bonus, even though I deserved it. So the more you have to put it at the right level. So in an unrelated diversification, it would be more like rewarding each unit or division for their performance as opposed to the company as a whole. Now, behavioral awards tend to work best when you have a very strong culture or when you have a high need for interdependence. So everybody lives and dies together. You can do performance rewards in that environment where everybody lives and dies together, but just be aware that if you miss performance awards because somebody is underperforming, that's actually become a disincentive. It's amazing what Southwest achieves just by throwing parties and those sorts of things. Those are behavioral awards. We get together and we celebrate and we talk about this guy's the top, this and that. But it's relatively cheap and it goes a long, long way. The last thing I'll say about rewards is the funny thing is the studies show that the more that you give explicit rewards for good behavior, over time, people begin to expect that and they no longer see it as good behavior. And so there is a danger of these performance awards that people will soon see them as an entitlement and they will no longer be motivational. Or sometimes by establishing an extrinsic reward, you diminish the intrinsic motivation to do those steps. We're going to transition now, and instead of talking about how the CEO gets the company to do what it wants to do, we're going to talk about how the owners get the CEO to do what they want it to do. Back in a minute.